Welcome to our Google Sheets crash course. My goal today is to take you from beginner to giving you a strong foundation in Google Sheets. So we're going to start off with creating a Google Sheet. So I like to create it from drive.google.com. Otherwise, you can also go to sheets.new, and that is a direct shortcut to create a Google Sheet. Let's go back and create it from Drive just so you can see where it gets stored. And so in drive.google.com, go ahead and click on New and then Google Sheets, and you can select blank or from a template. So let me just show you the templates real quick. So Google has some pre-built templates that are suitable for a variety of needs. You may find one here that will suit your purposes and save you some time in creating from scratch. Let's go ahead and go back to our Google Drive, however, and let's click Google Sheets and create a blank one. So now you notice we have two open, and so maybe I want to trash one of these or delete one of them. And so if I go to File, you can see Move to Trash, but it's actually grayed out right now. It's not letting me do this. And the reason why is I haven't given this a title and I don't have any data in here. So let's just call this to be trashed. And then you notice this saving is up here. And in Google Sheets, it automatically saves all the changes you make as long as you are connected online. And then it'll let you know when it is synced. So now we can go ahead and go File again and click on Move to Trash. Gives it a little alert saying take out of trash if I accidentally deleted it, or I can go to Google Sheets home screen. So before I move any further, let me show you how to restore a trashed file. If you do that by accident, you can go to drive.google and then click on Trash, and there we can see our to be trashed. So here we can click on Restore, or alternatively, we could delete forever. So let me go ahead and just delete this forever and get rid of it forever. Now let's go ahead and go to here, and we'll just call this Google Sheets. And this is actually how we name this file as well. We can do it right from here. Another thing to keep in mind is you can do it from here and click on Rename and rename it as well. So either spot works for naming that Google Sheet. All right, so let's go ahead and close out our Google Drive for now, and let's focus on the Google Sheet. So first off, let's get a quick overall view. So we have our menu here, and there's lots of different things here, and we're not going to go over all of them today. One thing to note is you can search the menus if you're looking for something specific. But basically, if under File, we have options to make new. You can open one. You can also import directly into a Google Sheet. So for example, a CSV or Excel file, you can import directly. You can also make a copy, which is a neat feature. Let's say you're making a monthly sheet. You can just make your new monthly sheet and then just overwrite your data in the new copy. This is also where you can share, you can email, you can download it as an Excel, PDF, HTML, CSV, TSV, or ODS. This is also another place you can rename. You can move it. And so moving, you can actually select the different folders where you may want this to go. So if we want to move it to MISC, we can do it like that. We can also add a shortcut to Drive if we already have it in a folder. Again, move to trash. And version history, we'll get to that in a couple minutes. Make available offline. This is an option to be able to edit offline and then sync the data when you get back online. Details, settings. So settings has the locale, so you can select the country you're in. You can also select time zone. You can also select some of these things that are a little more advanced. So we're going to go ahead and click cancel on that right now. And lastly, you can also do print, and you can print your Google Sheet. So under edit, we have things that have to do with text and such. So we can undo, which is a super key feature that you'll want to learn. Control or Command Z to undo the last action you did. This is common even for expert like me. You might accidentally do a click or something that you didn't intend, and just doing Control Z will undo the last action, maybe a couple times if you accidentally did a couple of actions. Also cut, copy, paste, and paste special. I'll show you this a little bit more in a couple minutes. And then delete, and then find and replace. I'll also go through that in a little bit. So then we can go through view. I'm not going to go through all these. This is about showing the formula bar, for example, Gridlines, etc. Insert, you can insert cells, rows, etc. Also stuff like checkboxes, new smart chips that they have, comments, notes, etc. Formatting has to do with, you can do the theme here and change the different standard colors. You can also change the format of the numbers or values in the cells. You can format text, the alignment, wrapping, rotation of the text, font size, conditional formatting, alternating colors, or clear formatting. And some stuff to do with data, and we'll get into that a little more. You can create a Google form right from here. You can do a spell check or some autocomplete. You can do the explore function, and I'll show you that a little bit more. You can also do notifications if you want to get notifications when it's edit or commenting. Extensions, you can get some add-ons for this. You can record a macro. You can actually do some app script. I have some tutorials on that. And then finally help. And then under here, we have some different, here's your undo and redo, print, a paint format, and I'll show you that in a little bit. This is actually the zoom. You can make the sheet larger or smaller. We'll go ahead and leave it 125 for now. And some quick number formats, so currency, percent, some decimal places, and so forth. And then here's some stuff with text, so font, font size, bold, italic, strike through, text color, fill color, borders, and so forth. And then the part that everyone likes to see, sharing. And so sharing, you can add an email address here. You can also change the general access. You could give everyone with a link the ability to view or comment or edit. This is not a good thing to do if you have sensitive data. In that case, you want to restrict and just give people direct access. We could add by email here. You can select whether you want notified. You can give a message, hey, here's the spreadsheet. And then you can select the role that they'll have. If they only need to view it, then this is the best. Or if you want them to be able to comment, or if you want them to be able to actually edit the data. So let's go ahead and just make them an editor. All right, and now it shows that access updated. And you can always go back and review, and you can actually remove access, or you can transfer ownership. Next, we'll just get into the tab structure. And so some people call them tabs, some call them sheets, but it is these things on the bottom. You can create a new one using this add sheet, or you can do duplicate if you want to make a copy of a sheet or a tab. You can do a number of different actions here. Delete, duplicate. So duplicate makes a copy of. You can actually copy to a new spreadsheet or an existing one. So you can copy a tab between two different spreadsheets, or you can copy an individual tab and make a new spreadsheet from that. Here you can rename that tab. You can change the color that's underneath. You can also protect it. And so even if you have an editor, you can prevent them from editing it. So if I do this, then only I can edit this sheet. Or you can just show a warning, and this allows people to edit, but it'll give them a warning when they try to. So for example, now if I try to edit, it gives me this heads up. So I can go okay, and it'll allow the edit, or I can say cancel, and it prevents it. Let's go ahead and get rid of this real quick. Remove that. And then we can get rid of that. One thing to keep in mind, let's go ahead and just do the protection again. Do show a warning. So if we have this down here, how do we get to it? Well, we can either click on a tab and go back to protect. This gives a new option to add a new protection, but we can just hit cancel, and then we can see that existing one and delete it there. Another way we can get to that is go into data and protect sheets and ranges. So you can see it doesn't have one right now, but we can also add one from here. We can also do it just to a specific cell. So you can see here is only restricting A1. So if I do A1, it gives me a heads up. If I do it outside of that, it does not. All right, so that's the basics of the protection. So we'll go ahead and get rid of that real quick. So we can also just move tabs around just by clicking and dragging them. We can also hide them like that. And then you can either view them from this all sheets shortcut right here. Another place is from the view menu. You can do hidden sheets and show sheet 2, and that automatically shows it again. So let's go ahead and delete this tab and work on our tab 1. All right, so now that we've reviewed some of the basic overall structure, let's just get right into the tab and what we're going to do with this. So just for the general naming structure, these are rows. So this would be row 7, and then these are columns. So column A, column B, column C, and so forth. And so this is called a table. And then each one of these individually are cells. So another feature that is cool to use is what's called freezing rows or columns. And so if you go to here, you can see it turns to a hand, and I can drag this down. And what happens then is if we scroll down, you can see here's row 72. But if we start scrolling up, you can see that these two sections stay visible even when we scroll down. And then we can do the same thing with columns, and then we can scroll over to the right, and we can see now that we're at P and all the rest are hidden by the scrolling. So let's go ahead and undo this right now. Another place you can get to this is from view, and you can do freeze one row, or you can do no rows. Another thing you can do is you can actually resize columns or rows. And so you can do that, go in between them, and when you see this symbol show up, you can drag back and forth. You can do the same thing with a row. You can also right click and do resize, and then you can actually specify how many pixels you want, or you can do fit to data. And then on these columns, you can also do the same thing. You can see the default is 120, or we can go down to 100. And then let's go ahead and start looking at entering data. So let's start by entering some financial data. Let's say we're entering some monthly gross sales data and then some expenses. All right, so we have our column headers here, and then we can actually enter in our data. And so for example, maybe we're going to do January, February, March, and so forth. Once I've entered a couple of these, instead of typing them all out, if I actually select these, and that's what I just did was clicked and dragged. And then on this lower right-hand corner, I can just hover until I get this crosshatch, and I can just drag this down. And that gets me down through November, maybe one more to get to December, and it auto-filled based on what I already had entered. And so I'll actually do the same thing with numbers as well. So let's say we had 1,000 gross sales, 500 expenses, and maybe went up to 2,000 and 1,000. So let's go ahead and drag this down and see if Google can figure out what we're trying to do. And sure enough, there it is. So one thing to keep note is if you just do 1,000 and drag that down, it looks like it stayed the same. Now, if we go back here and do 1,001 and drag down, you can see it automatically recognized the incrementation that I was using. And so since I added 1 here, it continues to add 1 as we go down. This also works with dates. If I do 1/1/2024, and then if I click this and drag down, it actually begins to automatically increment. So one thing now, so this one I might want to do the reverse, and if I do 2 Januaries, drag it down, now it stays the same. All right, so now let's look at some quick ways to manipulate or highlight this data. So first of all, we can maybe resize our column, make that a little smaller. Maybe we want to actually make these look a little nicer as a header. We could just do bold, something like that. But we could actually even add maybe some background colors like that. We could do some light color ones, leave like that, or maybe we could do a little darker. Now the text is a little hard to read, so maybe we could even switch this from dark to light. That looks pretty cool. Maybe we can actually do some stuff with this. So there's a cool option here called alternating colors. And this one actually includes a header. But since we picked our own header, we can choose to not use a header and just do that. Or we could switch this up, change it to maybe a blue or something. If we want to reset, let's just do some undos real quick. Go back to the beginning. Maybe just do the whole thing as a alternating table. So we can pick maybe like this one. You can see then it automatically takes that header as well. Maybe we could center these. So this is that horizontal one there. And maybe we want to make these a little taller, make it look a little more like a header. So then we could actually even vertically center these. So this is top, middle, and bottom. And then you can see here we got left align, right align, and center. And then this is a little darker again, so maybe we'll do a white, and then maybe we can do a bold. So you could do italics you want, you can even do strike through. Obviously that's not probably applicable for here. We can also increase the size of the font here, or we could actually even change the font. Maybe that one the bold looks a little funky, maybe something like that. Another thing we could do is we could pull this in, but you can see now that text is getting cut off. So let's go ahead and wrap this. And you can see now it's overflowing on the bottom. So let's go ahead and actually resize this here and do fit to data. Now you can see it's fitting nicely. So we can make this a little smaller if we want as well. And we could change the font of these if we like. We could change the font in this one, perhaps. Maybe to Allegra, something like that. Or maybe change the font on these. Calibri. All right, so now we got some basic formatting going on, but these are just numbers. Maybe we want them to show up as dollars. So we can just do this quick format as currency here, or there's a little shortcut here and it allows you to select different kinds. So you could do accounting style. You can do financial there, which we're not seeing any negatives. So we do standard currency. We can do rounding currency. We can even mess it up and do it as a date. There's also custom ones down here. Dates, or you can do some custom number formatting. You could do a bunch of different options there. So we have some dollar signs here. We could actually just do plain text, for example, or automatic. We can actually do a shortcut here, currency, and then this allows you to increase or decrease decimal points. So that takes us to a rounded currency, or if we need to add them back to see those cents, we can do that. So let's go ahead and make them rounded currency for now. And now we have our basic data table. That's what we would call this. So a couple things I want to do before we move on, a couple little tricks. I want to show you how to insert a link. And so let's say we want to add a link to Google. We call this Google, and there's a link, and it allows us to click and bring us to Google. So that's just accessible through this insert link. You can also do this through a formula called hyperlink. You can do google.com and use it just like that as well. And then another cool thing I'll show you is how to do find and replace. So if you go to edit, find and replace, or here is the shortcut, Control+H. And so we can actually do a quick replacement. Let's say we want to replace month with date. And then we have some different options here. We're not going to get super into this right now. Let's just go ahead and do this sheet though, which means this specific tab or sheet instead of the whole spreadsheet. And then let's just do ahead, replace all. And there you can see it replaced that month with date. So if we want to switch it back, we could simply flip this around, place all again, and there we go. So let's look at some other things we can do as well. So first of all, let's see what adding a checkbox looks like. So checkbox, and then we can go insert and checkbox here. You can simply drag it down to apply it across multiple rows, or sideways to go across multiple columns. You can make these a little smaller if you like. They look a little big to you. We could do another thing is a drop down. So let's get rid of these checkboxes. We'll just delete them. And then we could actually just do this and do drop down, and we could select our drop down option. Another option. And so this creates chips, their new format. However, if you like, I prefer this. You can do arrows like this, or you can even do plain text, which hides it until you start to type. So my preference is arrows, and so let's just go with that. And then now you can see, you can simply click and select these. You can also start typing in them and select the applicable options. All right, so let's X out of that menu. Let's show you how to quickly delete these. So let's click that edit button. You can see it's actually only selecting D2 right now. Let's just do a colon and then D, and we'll click remove rule. And what this is going to do is going to remove the dropdown from the entire range. So if we actually do undo, let's look at another way of doing this. Instead of having to type that, let's go ahead and go to data validation. Now you can see that data validation rule. You can simply delete it there. So let's get rid of this column for the moment, at least the dropdowns. We're going to reuse this column for something else. But before we go there, this is just text, which is not bad, but we may want to use an actual date there. Maybe we want to use this for some different things. So maybe we want to use something like this, but we could actually still display it as a month. Let me show you here. So if we go to here, it gives us different options, and I can actually select month and then select what format I want to look. So I could do August, for example, there, and lo and behold, it shows up like that. So we drag this down. It's still January, but you can see here it incremented the day by 1. So if I change this around, change that to February, now I should be able to drag this down, and now we have all the months. So a lot of people want to know how to do this drop down for dates. So you can see it doesn't happen here. So what we can actually use is go to the drop down, and from here we'll select is valid date. And if we do that, now that drop down shows up. So we can go ahead and delete that just for the moment. So now we have our dates in here. Next, let's look at our basic profit. So we'll go ahead and put our profit there, and then we'll start with a very basic formula. And so all we're actually going to do in here is cell references. And so you can start that with equals, and then Google actually automatically suggests this formula, B2 minus C2. If I hit tab, it'll automatically grab that. But something's weird with this number format, which brings up another great tip. This is very confusing for people when a number shows up like this or date shows up as a number. So the reason for this is because we had something else in here. So this is showing up as a date instead of a number. So let's go ahead and actually just select our currency format here. And now you can see that turns into a number again. If you want me to show you how to make it look screwy again, let's just pick a date format. And now you can see that it's showing up screwy. So let's go back to our dollar here. Let's actually paint this format that looks a little different than this. So if I just select this, I click this paint format, and then I just click on the first cell that I want to apply it to, and lo and behold, there we show up with that. Now I can automatically apply this formula down to this row instead of typing it in each one and going back and forth. What I can actually do is click on this and just drag this down, and now that formula automatically updates. And so what it's looking at is this is actually a cell reference. And so we mentioned about rows and columns before. And so every time you reference a cell, and so let me just show you real quick. We do equals and we do A1, it's going to display month. Let me actually undo this real quick and get it over here, because Google thinks it's part of it and is screwing up our format. So if I just do equals A1, it'll show up whatever is in that cell. So I can change this to A2, and now it shows January. Or we can show B1 and so forth. And so once we have that reference, so let's say B2, right? On this profit, we can subtract a different cell from it. And so we can do B2 minus C2. And so I'm taking the value in this one and subtracting the value in C2. So we could add this back, for example, let's say we just had these two numbers. We could figure out what our gross was by doing equals profit plus our expenses, just like that. Or maybe another thing we want to do is figure out our gross margin. And now we can do equals and do our profit divided by our gross sales. Now we have 0.5. So different people may like using a decimal, or they may like using a percentage. So let's go ahead and drag that down, and then let's actually format this as a percentage. And so we see we have a 50% margin on those. So we could actually decrease the decimal point on those as well. We could center these even if we like. Maybe make this a little smaller. Again, we're having the same issue as we were before. So let's go ahead and wrap that. And there we go. Now we have our gross sales, expenses, profit, and our margin. And we're already looking like a Google Sheets expert. One thing as we move forward, so we already have dates here. One thing that I see a lot as an expert is people will mix text and numbers. And so let's say Bob sold 1,000. So now if I want to do math on this, if I was trying to do my same thing, it costs 500. If I do my same formula, it says text cannot be coerced toward a number. So what we want to make sure is if we have numbers that we want to do something with, we need to keep them by themselves. And so another thing that people might do is you might say 100 units and they cost $10. And so now we want to see what was our total sales. We had 100 units times 10, but we still have that same thing. So if we change this to 100 and then we'll just assume that it's units, now we can have our math. Let's go ahead and get rid of that for a moment. So what if we have our table over here, but we actually decide we want to move it over? If I just select this and then get here until I have a hand. So you look up here where my cursor is, turn from an arrow to a hand, and I can actually just drag this down. And I can just drag it wherever I want in the sheet, and it works just like that. So maybe I want to just move it here, and I can do it like that. Now I can actually resize this column. Maybe I can make this look a little nicer. Resize that, make it look like a little table here. Another thing I can do instead of dragging this around is I can actually copy and paste. And so if we just do this, I can do copy and we could paste that over there. And now we have a duplicate. We can undo to undo that change. One thing we could do then is paste values only. And you can see now that it's pasting just the numbers without those formatting. So sometimes this is handy if you're trying to take a little bit of data. Like for example, if you need to pull out these expenses and you're like pasting that down there, and then you're like, that is not what I needed. You can do paste special values only, or use the shortcut. I use the shortcut all the time. For me, it's Control-Shift-V. If you're on a Mac, it's Command-Shift-V. And I use this all the time because then you can take those numbers out of there without taking the formatting and potentially screwing up where you're putting that into. So for example, like if you're trying to put this over here, that looks very funky. All right, let's say we realized after building our table, we wanted to get our number of units sold. And so what we can do in here is we can actually insert a column. And one thing to note is you can also do insert row above or below. And again, if we go back to the column, you can insert column left or right. You can actually insert multiple columns. So you can do insert multiple left. Actually, you can't even really tell because it went off to the right. So let's go ahead and delete some columns actually. So one neat thing with Google Sheets is you can actually get rid of all of your extra columns. So now you can see there's actually no columns. Whereas in Excel, the more you scroll, the more that is added. So let's actually get rid of the rest of these rows as well. And so let me go ahead and just scroll down. And then I'm gonna hit Shift and then click on the bottom one, and that selects all those rows. If I right click over here, now I can delete these rows. Other options here, if you had data, you could do clear, hide, or resize. Let's go ahead and delete this right now. And now we have a quick little table here without any extra rows. So we can actually get rid of these. And now we can actually go back to here, show, and uncheck grid lines. And you can see now it has a really clean look. So we can actually do some stuff here, make it look cool, add some little white between there. We call this units. And let's say our units were $10 a pop. That's a percentage. Go ahead and change this. We don't want dollars or percent, so let's go ahead and do a number. But we don't want that to be 0.10. Go ahead and get rid of that, and then retype that as 10, 20, 30. Oh, we're gonna have to redo this again. Let's go ahead and paint that format. And those went in as decimals, so if you look at there, that's 0.3, 0.2. So let's change that 20, 30. And now let's go ahead and just drag this down. There we go. So now we have that additional metric in there. Could add maybe some borders on this. So let's do that real quick. Let's change the color on our border, maybe to this one, and then do that in between. And then maybe we want a border around the whole thing. And so let's go ahead and do that. Maybe a black one. Maybe we can go double wide. So you can do the width here. This also gives you the option of where you're going to do the borders. So this would be all the borders, which I do not want to do. So let's undo. You can do just the inside borders. You can do just the horizontal, just the vertical, just outside, which is what I want to do, just left, just top, and so forth. And if you want to remove all the borders, you click clear. So let's undo that. Let's finally do the one I was going to do, which is outer borders. Now that looks really cool. Let's actually insert and put a little header on here. So you can actually merge cells. And so for example, let's just say, and then we want to center this, but we can't center it over the table because it's only in this cell. So what we can do is select all these cells, and then we can click this merge. And now it shows up over all the cells. You can see that real quickly. If we put a background on it, you can see that's over all the cells. Let's go ahead and do a bold on that. Maybe select Allegra, and we can select a bigger size. Maybe get rid of that background, just make it clean. I kind of want to see a different font here. Maybe Garamond. I won't take up all your time doing this. Here we go. Actually, this is 2023. All right, so we are rolling on this. We have a very professional looking table here. I'm going to insert some columns here because I got a little ahead of myself. I want to show you some other cool things you can add here. Let's add a couple more columns, and let's add a couple more rows. You can actually add more rows here. I can actually select how many I want to add. Maybe it was too many. I'll delete some here. All right, so let's do some things. I want to see a year total. And then what we're gonna do is actually start using some formulas. So these are just some cell references that we're adding together. But we're gonna actually use a formula here because I don't want to do this plus this plus this. So let's go ahead and delete that. If we do equals, Google's actually automatically suggesting this sum formula. So we could do that, but I actually want to show you what a building formula looks like. So let me do equals sum. And then if you look, here's this formula help. And this is going to be one of your best friends as you learn how to use formulas. And so what it does is it tells you what the formula is, how it works, and so forth. And so let's do actually up here. It's hard to see the tooltip. So let's do that sum here. Before we do that, let's just open this up. So this tells you how you can sum things up. And so you can select a column or a number of cells just like that, and it actually shows you a quick tooltip of what that actually is. But it's telling you can actually do more values here, so you can actually manually add something in here. So you can see it went from 78,000 to 78,100, and you can do that ad nauseum. You could do another one. You could actually pick individual cells and get those totals. So for our purposes, we just want to total this column. And so let's just do this C3 through C15. And then we want to do our quick formatting here. And so what we could do with this formula, the same thing like we did with these, is we can drag it over. And so what you'll notice is this is C3 through C15. So let's drag it over one and see what happens to that formula. Now it's D3 through D15. So what you see is that these references to these cells are changing as we drag this around. And so let's actually undo this real quick. Let's see what happens if we actually just copy and paste this. And actually just do regular paste here. So you can see the same thing happens whether we drag it or copy and paste it. So let's go ahead and we can drag this backwards even. And then drag this over to see how many units. We actually don't want dollars in this, so let's go ahead and convert that to a number. Get rid of those and center that. And then this one, we actually probably want a same percentage. Do our margin there. For instance, we have a fixed expenses here based on our units. We're having the same percentage. All right, let's go ahead and do a quick little format to make ourselves a nice little box down here at the bottom. Maybe vertically do that, do this, maybe go one darker. There we go, now we're looking nice. Maybe do a little border in between. Now we have a nice little clean table with our totals. So one thing as we're going down through here, maybe we want to visualize this data. And so what we could do is the simplest thing is simply Sparkline. And what we can do is grab some data. And there is our plot line. So look, just looks like a straight line right now. So let's go ahead and really mess this up for ourselves. And you can see there's a big dip. Let's go 25,000. Now you can see that it's taking shape. So that's the basics of the Sparkline. I'm not going to go into the more details because it gets a little crazy and there's a lot of options there. But I just wanted to show you how that works. So next, let's show you how to make a real chart. And by a real chart, let's go ahead and select our table here and then click Insert Chart. And then now we have delved into the maze that is Google Charts. So again, I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on this. We have a ton of options here to get really deep into this. But what we want to do is select a month, for example. Now we can see our months across the bottom. And then let's just pick one series. So these series are, each of these displays are showing up. So let's just remove all of them. And then let's just pick one. Let's say gross sales. Now you can see that little nice chart showing our increase in sales. In this case, very consistently. I'd be very happy if this was my business. And so this is how we'll end this one right now on this chart. I'll just show you real quick how you can do line chart. You can do area chart and stuff like that. I'm not going to go into all the details of all the different things. There's lots of options that you have. You can do pie charts and so forth. I'll show you one like that right now. It shows a breakdown. This one's kind of cool. It's showing an increase as you go around the wheel. So let's just go back to bar chart for now, or a column chart, technically speaking. And we'll call that good for the moment. And what I like to do is make these look nice. So one quick trick before we move on, I'm going to show you how to change these background colors. Make this look really slick. I like making the background and the border the same color. And it looks really clean to me. Maybe it doesn't to you, but I really like this clean look. And you can pick kind of whatever color you want. You can pick even a yellow, if you want. If that's your brand color, you can actually insert custom colors in here. You can do RGB colors, you can pick something. So that's a really awesome thing that you can do there. All right, let's add some other quick metrics. I'm just going to show you a couple quick formulas you can use here. So for example, let's just move this chart. Let's give ourselves a little room here. Move this chart over. So what if we want to see our growth rate? So let's add growth rate. And this will give you a little bit of math too. So I'm going to use my paint format. So you can see immediately this is screwy. And so this is an advanced trick. This is going to be cool. So I did not learn this for a while. We go paint format. So what I'm doing here, I could paint using this one, right? But the problem is I have this border. And so let me just actually show you. Paint format and pull this over. It's okay, but now I have this big border there. So let me undo that. So if I actually select from here and do these both, now what I'm going to do is paint format. Instead of going here though, I'm actually going to go on this gross margin. And it's going to mess up our numbers, but it's going to be faster to fix than the other thing. So I'm going to hit gross margin. And you can see now that it actually did that with the border like it is over here. So now all I got to do is just change this to %, and I'm good. And let's do our growth rate. So since we don't have prior date to January, we can't really calculate the growth rate there. But let's just show growth rate here. Let's just do it on our gross sales. So let's just do this minus this. And the way you calculate percentage is that minus that over the initial. And so our calculation is 100%. And so let's go ahead and just copy this down. Do like that. And then this one we could do actually this and see our year to date over C4. And our total growth rate is 11,000%. It's amazing. All right, so then let's do some other metrics over here. So let's say average per month. And so here, what we do is average, and it's giving me the wrong range here. It's only going to 7. So if I open this up, average, and it works the same as a sum, you can just select your ranges there. So if we just do this, you can see our average per month over the year was 6,500. We can actually double check this. If we do our year total divided by 12. So now we can see that our average is indeed correct. So we could do this, pulls across, see what our average across all these metrics are. And maybe we want to actually put this into its own little table. And so this we could take, let's say these, paint format, take them down here, or maybe just even copy these like that. And then we could say metric, maybe copy this over here. That did not paint it correctly. Probably because this is not a correct format. So let's go ahead and actually do this. There we go. I think it was kind of locked up with that alternating rows there. Let's do some named ranges. This is an awesome tool to have. So let's do this. I'm going to select this, and then under data, let's go to named range. And so we can call this gross sales. And so we can include the top one or not. Maybe we just go to the numbers there. And I forgot for a second, can't have space in there. And then let's do a couple other ones quick. Expenses, profit. So the reason why this is cool is right here where we did this average, we could actually just do gross sales, and look at that, it's showing up there. And so we can actually use that instead of actually typing in the cell reference. So the one crazy thing with this though is if you drag this around, it does not change. So I drag it over, it's still gross sales. So named range is awesome if you don't want the cell references to change or get broken like that, because it does not change when you drag it around. And so that's a cool little trick there. Let me just put this border around this one, make that look nice. Little small thing there. And maybe like that. Maybe white. There we go. Maybe change this to that. So now we have a quick little metric there. Get our units centered. All right, as we start wrapping this up, let me show you a couple other quick tools. So one is called the filter tool. And so if I come up here, looks like a funnel. Also can go to data and create a filter. If I go to filter, you can see, again, this font doesn't look very good when it gets bolded. Let me go to Calibri maybe, and expand that a little bit. So what I can do with this is I actually can sort my range. This is kind of cool. So one thing to note, let me undo this real quick, is actually remove this. Let's do this way, and then hit this create filter, and let's sort Z to A. So you can see now we actually got screwed up because this January is not supposed to be 12,000. So one thing to keep in note if you use these filters is to make sure to select all the data that you have for your data set. So if you sort, it's not going to do mismatch, because now if this was all different numbers, you might not know which month it belonged to, and it could take you a while to figure out what that was. So let's go ahead and undo that, get back to where it is. Let me just show you real quick this filter. So you already seen the sort. You can do sort A to Z. You can also do just select maybe the first quarter, and it automatically shrinks. That's pretty cool. And so you can do select all, it goes back to all of them. And so in this, you can just do clear. And so whatever's checked is what shows up. So if we want to see maybe October, November, December, so your Q4 shows up just like that. You can see that our chart actually automatically updates as well. So let's go ahead and go back to select all. And so let's go ahead and remove that filter. I just wanted to show you really quick how that worked. Another thing that is pretty cool, if you select some numbers, some cells here, if you go on the bottom right, Google has this quick little helper, and this is really good to use if you're trying to validate numbers or calculations. Maybe you put in a formula that's kind of complicated, and you want to make sure that the individual parts are correct. And so here you can actually see, here's your sum, average, your minimum number, your max number, count, and how many count of numbers there are. And so that's pretty cool, little summary there. Another thing you can do is if you go to data, you can look at column stats, and it actually tells you some cool stuff here. You can see distribution and stuff like that. So comments are awesome You can do comment here. You can also have the shortcut is right here. So you can click on any cell and click insert comment. And then you can either just leave a comment, change to date, for example, and leave that comment there. And then you can always see it there. You can also see it highlighted next to the tab. And you click see all and see all the comments. And then when that is resolved, maybe we're like, okay, I'm going to change the date. Okay, I am done. So now I can mark it as resolved. Or maybe I can just click on this and be like, done. And then hit resolved. And now that comment disappears. So that's pretty cool. You can open comment history there and see resolved. See that one there. We can see all. We can see open. There's none open. Another thing you can do in comment is you can actually tag people. So you can tag somebody and say, hey, check it out. And what they'll do is they'll actually get an email with that comment. So that's pretty awesome. So let's say you don't want to actually do a comment thing. Maybe you want to leave something in here. So another thing you can do is a note. And so this could say, and then it just sits there for people to see. And you can say maybe here. So these notes are handy to leave just as references, maybe to how the calculations are made, maybe where the data comes from. Could even be for somebody, but comments I really find work well when you're interacting with other people in a sheet because you can tag them and you can kind of go back and forth in that way. Whereas I would use notes more as notes for that cell or that range or that table. Looks like quick little thing there. That's now not centered because I added a new column. So let's go ahead and merge that because I am a little OCD sometimes. All right, one more thing in here and then we're going to Google Forms. So let's look at version history because people are like, what happens if I made a bunch of changes and some data got deleted and I don't know how to get back to it now? So version history is gonna be your best friend. So under File, Version History. So first of all, you can name a current version. So some people like to do this if you made a bunch of changes, verified everything, and you're like, okay, we want to save this. So you can save it by naming it. Otherwise, if we're going back to a previous version, look at version history. And look what happens here. It aggregates what Google considers major changes under these. And so if I click on this, look at that. I can actually click back and see the different changes I made. You can see my table changing. Look at that. That was before we got rid of our extra columns and rows. So this allows you to go back to this, to whatever part. And then what you can do is you can do a couple different things. So first of all, you could restore previous version. Now, one thing to keep in mind in this is you would lose all the changes you made after that. So if you made some changes you needed to keep, then what would be a better thing is to make a copy. And so I'll do this a lot. If I have to restore data, if someone screwed up some stuff, I'll make a copy. And what I'll do is I'll go to here, go back to my copy, and maybe what someone had done was did this, and I'm going up here it is 3,000. This is supposed to be 3,000, and I can go back and compare. So that is how you use version history. Super quick tutorial. So let's go ahead and move that to trash. We're going to create a Google form. So under Tools, create a new form, and you can actually create a form by going to form.google.com. It must be forms.google.com. There we go. So you can create a form from here, but I like to create it from the Google Sheet that I'm using. Then it's automatically tied to it. So let's go ahead and create a new Google form. And maybe this one will be called monthly stats entry. So maybe we want to capture this data. And so here we could say date, and we can make this a date there. We can add a new question. We'll call this gross sales. We'll call this expenses and units. I think that's all the data we need to capture, right? Gross sales, expenses, and units. I think everything else is calculated. So that's all we need to do to create the Google form. Then we can actually hit preview, and this is how we'd fill it out. And this is also the link that you could share with somebody so someone else can fill it out, because anyone can fill out this Google form. And so let's go ahead and do this. Let's say we're doing our entry for January, our gross sales. Let's say we're continuing our trajectory. We had 13,000. Let's see, 13,000. would be 6,500. And how many units would that be? That would be 130 units. So let's click submit. And we can actually submit another response right away if we want to. And we can see that, or we'll close this for now. Here's our Google form. You can actually manage your responses through here, but I'm going to leave this for now. I'm just trying to show you the basics. This will be another video. But what we can see now is we have a new tab that just created, and look, lo and behold, here is our data from our Google form. And so that you can then use, for example, we're starting a new one here. We could insert maybe a couple more rows here, and we could actually change this to 2024, drag this down. We could do some fancy references, but I'm just going to keep this super simple. I'm going to click this gross sales, expenses, didn't want to do that, expenses, and units. And sometimes it doesn't want to do that very well. So I'm clicking equals, and then there's the units. So to get back to that form, this is an unlinked form, so be careful not to do that. If I go here, manage form, go to live form, there are the options here. You can do send form if you want to email it to somebody. You can actually embed it in a web page, or you can do those things as well. But let's just go to that main one. Let's actually do February real quick. So 14,000, and then I believe that's 7, and this would be 140 units. Submit. So now we have our next month. So we can just take these, drag it down. We'll just drag it down each month. And then the next month you can submit again, and then just drag that down. That allows you to sync immediately from that form responses and go into this table. Let's go ahead and just make this 2024 sales table. And there we go.
So one thing we should probably update on this table is when you have direct cell references like this can get messed up if things get inserted or sorted, and so this isn't the best way to assign it on live data. So the best thing to do here will be to use a Sumifs, and then you can look at this whole column, and then this date was our entry date, and so we're going to use this, and then we're using a comma between each of these columns, and so this is our date, and so we want to compare it to this month. And so the way we can do that is we can do this inside double quotes, greater than or equals to, and then outside the double quotes we'll use an ampersand, and then we can click on that cell. And that's why we want that cell to be a date, not just text. And so now we're greater than or equals to this date, but now we need to make sure we cap it at the end of the month. So I'm going to select this whole thing, copy, and then put a comma in between, paste, and I'm going to flip this around. So now we need less than or equal to. And so we could drop it down to the next month, but that won't work when we get down to December. So what I'm going to do here is use a formula called end of month, which is just EO month. And then we can put that cell inside of this. And then the next thing we do is the number of months is 0. And so that gets the end of the same month. And so if we hover over this, you can see 1/31/2024. And so now we can close out our parentheses. And this now will work. If we can drag this down, this formula will work even as new data is added. And so let's go ahead and show what the rest of these look like. So Sumifs, and this will be expenses, where our date is greater than or equals to, and then I accidentally hit enter there, ampersand January, and then I can copy this again, comma, flip this around. So one thing, if you're doing a couple of these, is it's actually faster usually to copy and paste the formula. And so for example, here we go to units. So instead of doing this again, I'm just going to copy this whole formula. And so I'm double clicking in and doing this, and then double click and replace it. And then what I can do here is just change this to E, which is where our units were right there. And then we can drag this down. And now these will all automatically populate, and it won't matter if they get entered in the wrong order, because the way we did have it, for example, if someone entered in April and then March, those would have been backwards. And so one thing I want to do real quick here is clean up these really ugly errors. And so we're going to wrap this with if error. And so wrapping it just means I'm going to put it inside parentheses, and I'm using this function. And so if error, I just want to show maybe a dash. So I can drag that down. It just makes it look a little cleaner. I'm going to do the same thing over here. So I don't have a formula here because I can't calculate the growth rate when I don't have previous. So I'm just going to start here, if error, and again that dash, and then we can drag this down as well. Now one thing is we may want to do something if this is 0, for example. So we could just say if C26 equals 0, do nothing, otherwise we'll check that out. And that will just address this negative 100%. And so maybe we'll put a dash in there as well, just so it's obvious that we actually have that formula. And so now this will automatically update whenever data is entered in on the Form Responses tab. Now one thing with the Google Form is it's great if you don't want people to have access to your Google Sheet. But if they're entering data like this, they probably would have access. And so I'm going to show you how to build a data table. So we put together kind of a summary here, but this isn't usually the best way to store your actual raw data. And so let's go ahead and create a new tab. And what we're going to do here is actually use a table. And so we can just insert pre-built table. And so you can even just pick blank. There's different options in here if you find one, but we're just going to start with blank and show you how to build this. And you can go through the other ones if you're looking for a particular project. And so, for example, maybe what we're going to use is we'll actually use this for maybe the salespeople to enter their sales. And so then we could call it, sales entry, and then we can still have that date potentially, or we'd assume it's the date that they entered it. So for example, here we have a timestamp. So we could assume that's the date, or maybe we'll just keep them entering the date. And then they can enter their sales, and then maybe have a selection where they can select what salesman it is. So if it's Dwight or Jim, and this would be salesperson. So let's go ahead and update this real quick. Sales amount, salesperson. And at this point, maybe we'll decide we want to move this up and then do date, salesperson, and they can do sales amount and units. And at this point, if we go back, you can see that this Form Responses tab kind of updated a little bit. So we still have the date and sales amount, and then salesperson. Now we still have numbers in here because it hasn't updated. And so if we did a new entry, it would come through with that. So let's go ahead and go back to our response there. And so you can see here, we could select a date. And so we go to 2024 and March. And then we could select the salesperson, and this could be maybe 1500. Click submit. Now if we go back, now you can see this new data coming through. So this is one thing, if you update a Google form, it can kind of mess with you, because if you had something else, you may want to save this data separately and then start fresh. In this case, let's go ahead and just assume these are all January. And so update that like that. And then maybe we can pull these down a little bit, and then let's just do Jim and Stanley, and then maybe drop these down like that. If we go back to tab 1, we scroll down, we can see that it's still totaling. So that is the total of this. So if you remember this, we have there is our sum 4,200, and there it's summing up. Now we're missing our expenses, and so maybe we could use a different tab for expenses. Maybe we call this expenses. And then we call those expenses, but I think we already have a named range called that. And so we'll just call this expense table. And then we can put things like date, amount, description, something like that. And you can actually record the expenses as they come out. And then we can get rid of these extra columns we want. And so we come in here in 1/1/2024, and maybe we'll add 3 of those. And potentially this could even just be the cost of goods. And so if we go back here, and then we're usually roughly half is what this was ended up being. Obviously yours could be completely different. So if it's 650, and then 700 and 750, something like that. And this could be cost of goods. You could even have this be a drop down. So this is the new table format. And so the nice thing about this is you can do all the data validation right from here. So you can do dropdown and it will automatically populate for that table. And so we call this type or category. And so if I can spell category correctly. And so in here we could have, and then we could select COGS and have that there, but then we maybe have other expenses for January as well. So at this point, maybe we do or don't need the description, and then we could get rid of the rest of these columns, just like that. So another thing is, what happens if instead of this form responses, we actually want our sales on its own tab? And so at that point, maybe we want to do a table for sales. In this case, maybe office staff are entering it, or the salespeople have access to this. So we'll call this sales data. And so we could format this and name all these. So maybe this is date, client name, and maybe sales rep. And then maybe we have things like sector and amount. So we could start manually, but if you already have the data, we could go ahead and paste that in. And then whether you've entered the data or not, then you can go back through and check the column types. So date, and now if you double click, this will show a date picker. And then client name, so that's probably not gonna be a drop down. The sales rep, we could change that to a drop down. And so with this, you could even add things like colors if you like. And then those will show up just like that there. We could do the same thing with the sectors, and we could pick colors for these as well. And then you can also pick custom colors if you want to enter custom colors. Maybe you have a custom scheme that you could use there. And then once these are all done, then we can click done here. Those all fill in. And then amount, we could pick a number type, and then there is number, percent, and currency. And so there's text as well, drop downs, checkbox, and then smart chips that they have. And so this one, we'll go ahead and do a currency just like that. And then let's go ahead and delete this last one as we don't need it. And we can get rid of the rest of the columns on this tab as well. So we can even get rid of this empty one there. And there we go. So now we can enter all the sales data here. And this brings us to our final, as we wrap up, is we could then use this whole data to fill in this tab and populate this from this sheet instead of the form responses. And then we could even combine it, right? We could use expenses as the one side, and then we'll call this sales. And so then you have your sales or income and expenses, and you can fill in with these sum ifs. Now, one thing that's cool, and so let's go ahead and build this table real quick, is that these, before we did name ranges manually, but these automatically have name ranges. And so let me show you. So sum ifs. And so if we type in sales, you can see there's that name of that table, and then there's the different columns. So we could pick the amount there, and then we could do sales data again, date, and then do our greater than or equals to, ampersand, and our January. And then we can copy this, do it again, less than or equal to, and a month, and then 0, pull that out, pull that down, and then there's our sales. And expenses, we can do the same thing, but we're gonna have to use our expenses. So there's our amount, expense table, date, greater than or equals to, our start date there, less than or equals to, and then end of month, and like that. So there then is our expenses. Obviously now our expenses are way different than our sales because they're not filled in yet. And then at this point on our new sales table, we don't have units. So that might be something then we get rid of on this one, unless we have a way to fill that in. But I wanted to show you before we close that we can actually use a pivot table to do a lot of this work for us. And so I'm going to select a little bit of this data, insert pivot table. And so I'm going to drop this end reference here. And let's go to a new sheet. And so on a pivot table, you can kind of click and drag stuff into different places. And so rows is going to go down here. So it kind of gives you an idea, right? Rows down here, columns across, and values filling in. So we could do something like a date into our rows. And at first this doesn't look maybe super useful unless you want to see daily data, but we can right click on this, go to create pivot date group, month, year, month. And so one thing to keep in mind is month is going to aggregate even across multiple years, but year, month will make sure that you only have it in that particular month for that particular year. So then what we could do is under values, we could just throw in the amount, and there is our total. Now the cool thing about this is we can use our columns. So we could throw in sales rep, and there you can see all the sales rep across top with the total. And so we could even put this under there, and so you can see it like that. And then we could at this point put sectors in the columns, and you can see we get a very complex table very quickly. So it's up to you how you want to pivot that, but we could keep it simple like this. We can create a chart as well. There's our sales data month over month. And so a pivot table makes it very quick to take a data set like this, and without having to do any formulas, we can create the totals and then a quick chart. And again, on this chart, we could do the things like we did before, where we change the look of this. We could get rid of some of these by click and deleting. And then we could even go in here and then go into our series, add data labels. We'll make sure, change these to rounded currency, and go inside the end maybe, and change this font size. And so at this point, we probably need to go a little wider to make those readable. So there you go, something like that. And then we can change this title to sales by month. And there you go. You have a very quick and easy pivot table and chart. And so this chart too, one thing to keep in mind is you can copy this, and then you can go to another tab and you can paste it. And so you can build a couple different pivot tables on a single tab. So let me delete this real quick. And so you could go back to here again and select the data again, insert pivot table, delete that. We could do existing sheet and then select, maybe go right here. And then we could do the same thing, and we could build on this one, the date group, your month, and maybe this one, what we're going to do is do columns and then put the amount and the values, close this out. And at this point, now we can select this. And so one thing when creating charts too is make sure you don't include the grand totals, or it's going to throw you off. At this point, we can build a chart, and we could do something like a stacked. And now we can quickly see for each month a quick visualization of who brought in the sales for that month. So you can copy this chart as well and create a dashboard with this on the back end, because these don't look super pretty as is. Like, this looks a lot more presentable. And so if you want a presentable table, you could build it manually like we showed you before, and then you could do some quick charts and build those necessary tables to build the charts on the background like this. And then you could even hide this later, and then you'll be able to do those visualizations. All right, and so that's it for today's video. Now keep in mind, if you want to go deeper on any of the topics that we covered today, we have a ton of videos on our channel covering pretty much everything that we went through today in this video. And so make sure to check those out if you need to go deeper. So thanks for watching, and have a great day.